The phone rang just after midnight. I had been dozing off in my recliner, my sore knee aching from the winter cold, when I saw my daughter's name on the screen. Emily. I answered immediately. Dad. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She wasn't just upset, she was crying. Real crying. Dad, why are you on every news channel? For a second, I stared at the television across the room, completely confused. What are you talking about? She struggled to catch her breath. Gary found another clip online. They've been showing you all night. Before she said anything else, I already knew what this was really about. Because only a few hours earlier, my own daughter had told me not to come for Christmas. That wasn't even the worst conversation we'd ever had. The hardest conversations rarely involve shouting. Sometimes they're just a few quiet sentences that stay with you forever. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting alone in my kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, paying bills and pretending retirement was peaceful. The house had become very quiet over the years. My marriage had ended 15 years earlier. After enough time, you learn how to live alone. You make 1 cup of coffee, cook meals that last 2 days, talk to the dog. Then one day the dog is gone too. Life doesn't become terrible. It simply becomes smaller. The brightest part of my life had always been Emily and my 2 grandchildren. At least, that's what I believed. When my phone rang that afternoon and I saw Emily's name, I smiled. Hey kiddo. Hi Dad. Something in her voice felt different. Parents never stop recognizing when something is wrong. Everything okay? Yeah, she answered too quickly. Then came the silence. Finally, she said, Mom and Gary are hosting Christmas this year. Gary was my ex-wife's husband. He wasn't a bad man. That almost made things harder. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He simply had an endless need to be the center of attention. No matter what happened, somehow the story always became about him. Still, I kept things civil. For Emily. Sounds good, I said. What time should I come over? Silence. Long enough for my stomach to sink. Then she quietly said, Dad, maybe this year it would be better if you didn't come. For a moment I honestly wondered if I had heard her correctly. She cleared her throat. We're trying to make Gary feel more like part of the family. I looked toward the little artificial Christmas tree standing in my living room. The same tree I'd decorated for almost 20 years. Several handmade ornaments Emily created as a child still hung from its branches. A crooked angel. A paper snowman. Tiny reminders of a little girl who once couldn't wait for Christmas with her dad. Apparently, I'd kept those memories longer than she'd kept me. Are you still there? She asked softly. Yeah. Please don't take it personally. There wasn't any other way to take it. But I could hear the guilt in her voice. She already knew she was hurting me. She just wanted permission to do it. So I gave her that permission. I understand, sweetheart. The lie came easier than I expected. After we hung up, I stayed at the kitchen table for a long time. I wasn't angry, just exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone who had spent years carrying a heavy weight without realizing nobody even noticed. The next morning I still went shopping. I bought Ethan the remote control truck he'd wanted. Lily got a large art kit. For Emily, I spent 2 evenings creating something far more personal. An old photo album. 30 years of memories. Birthdays, school plays, fishing trips. Graduation, vacations. Every photograph told the story of a father who had never stopped showing up. On the last page, I wrote 1 sentence by hand. No matter where I spend Christmas, you'll always be my little girl. On Christmas Eve, I loaded every gift into my old pickup truck. I promised myself I wasn't going there to make anyone feel guilty. I would simply leave the presents on the porch, then drive away. Nothing more. I had no idea that before the night ended, my face would be on every television station in Ohio. 6 hours later, after leaving the gifts on Emily's porch, I drove back to my empty house. I spent the afternoon trying to distract myself. I watched an old football game, warmed up leftovers for dinner, and finally pulled out a box of family DVDs I hadn't watched in years. Soon the television filled with memories. There was Emily, at 8 years old, riding her bike for the first time. "Don't let go," she shouted. "I've got you," my younger voice answered. A second later, I let go. She rode several yards before realizing she was doing it alone. The smile on her face nearly broke me all over again. I watched one home video after another until the room felt quieter than ever. Around 7:30, I almost made a mistake. I picked up my coat and my truck keys. Part of me wanted to drive back to Emily's house. Not to argue, not to force my way inside, just to wave at the grandchildren through the window. I stood at the front door for nearly a minute. Then I hung my coat back up. If you have to beg for a place at someone's Christmas table, maybe that place isn't yours anymore. A little after 8 that evening, my phone buzzed. It wasn't family. It was the local community warming center, where I volunteered during winter storms. Heavy snow was moving into the area, and they needed extra hands. I replied with only 3 words. "I'm on my way." The shelter, inside an old church building, was already filling up. Homeless men escaped the freezing temperatures. Several elderly residents had temporarily lost heat in their apartments. Some people simply needed a warm cup of coffee and someone willing to listen. For the next couple of hours, I carried blankets, moved tables, fixed a stubborn thermostat, poured coffee, and joked with people who desperately needed something to smile about. Nothing extraordinary, just another winter night. Around 10:30 things finally settled down. I headed home as the snowstorm grew stronger. Visibility dropped quickly, and the roads became slick. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights sitting at a strange angle beside the highway. As I got closer, I realized it was a church shuttle bus that had slid into a ditch. I immediately pulled over, switched on my hazard lights, and called 911. The wind nearly knocked me backward as I stepped outside. Inside the bus were mostly elderly passengers returning from a Christmas event. Several looked terrified. One man appeared injured. Another woman couldn't stop crying. I climbed aboard. "My name's David," I said calmly. "Help is already on the way." Almost instantly, the panic eased. Years working emergency utility calls had taught me something important. People can handle bad situations. What scares them most is not knowing what's happening. As I checked on everyone, something outside caught my attention. A damaged utility pole leaned dangerously close to the roadway. One power line hung much lower than it should have. I immediately warned everyone to stay inside until first responders confirmed it was safe. Thankfully, they listened. Within minutes, firefighters, deputies, and EMTs arrived. Once the area had been secured, I helped several elderly passengers carefully step off the bus. One woman apologized over and over for moving slowly. I smiled. "You're doing just fine." She laughed through her fear. Then my boot landed on a patch of black ice. My feet disappeared beneath me. I crashed hard onto my left knee, and pain shot through my leg. A firefighter rushed over and helped me stand. "You okay?" I forced a grin. "I've been better." My hand had also been badly scraped against the frozen pavement. Nothing life-threatening. Just enough to remind me I wasn't young anymore. While EMTs checked my injuries, a local television crew arrived to cover the accident. One reporter asked if I would answer a few questions. I didn't think much about it. I simply answered honestly while they cleaned the cut on my hand and wrapped my knee. My only concern was making sure everyone from the church bus got home safely. Eventually, the EMTs wanted to send me to the hospital. I convinced them to let me go home instead, after they finished treating me. It was a little after midnight when I finally unlocked my front door. The neighborhood was silent beneath fresh snow. The house looked exactly as I had left it. Quiet, still, empty. I lowered myself carefully into my recliner, switched on the television, and closed my eyes for what I thought would be a minute. Then my phone exploded with notifications, text messages, missed calls, more alerts arriving every few seconds. For one terrifying moment, I thought something had happened to Emily or the grandchildren. Then my phone rang. Emily. I answered immediately. Dad. Her voice sounded completely different now. She wasn't uncomfortable. She was shaken. What's wrong? I asked. After several seconds of silence, she finally whispered, Why is your face on every news station? Emily's question caught me completely off guard. Why is your face on every news station? I looked toward the television across the room. The local station was replaying footage from the church bus accident. There I was, standing in the snow beside the bus, helping frightened passengers while firefighters worked around me. I shrugged even though she couldn't see me. Everyone's safe, that's what matters. But that wasn't what she wanted to talk about. Why didn't you tell me where you were? She asked quietly. I let out a slow breath. I didn't think it mattered. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything either of us could say. A few moments later, she whispered, Dad. Then she stopped. Neither of us knew how to continue the conversation. We said goodnight and hung up. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Linda, my ex-wife. I just saw the news, she said. I'm okay. Are you hurt? Just a sore knee and a cut on my hand. She sounded relieved. Then she sighed. Emily feels terrible. I looked back at the television. I imagine she does. After another long pause, she quietly wished me good night. Not long after that, Gary called. His voice was unusually cheerful. Quite a night, huh? He spent several minutes talking about the storm, the rescue, and the television coverage before finally getting to the real reason for his call. Emily never meant to hurt you. I didn't answer. Whether she meant to or not no longer mattered. Eventually he gave up and ended the call. The next morning my phone was flooded with messages. Old coworkers, neighbors, people from church, friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had seen the rescue on television. I thanked them and tried to move on with my day. Around noon, a former coworker sent me a link. You need to watch this. I clicked it. It wasn't the rescue that had gone viral. It was a 20-second interview recorded beside the ambulance. The reporter had asked me a simple question. Do you have family waiting for you tonight? I smiled politely and answered with complete honesty. Not tonight. She looked surprised. No Christmas plans? I shook my head. My daughter asked me not to come this year. That was all. No anger, no blame, no criticism. Just one honest sentence. Yet thousands of people began sharing the clip online. Comments poured in from strangers telling stories about spending holidays alone, divorce, broken families, children drifting away from aging parents. People weren't talking about the rescue anymore. They were talking about loneliness, especially the loneliness that many fathers carry without ever mentioning it. By afternoon, the clip had spread across local radio stations, community pages, and social media. I hated every bit of the attention. Then, late that day, my phone buzzed again. A text from Emily. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for several minutes before another message appeared. Dad, I found the photo album. My chest tightened. She had reached the final page. The handwritten note. No matter where I spend Christmas, you'll always be my little girl. Before I could even process that message, another notification appeared. This one came from a local newspaper reporter. She wanted to interview me. Not about the accident, about my life, about the years I'd spent quietly volunteering in the community. I ignored the request. At 62 years old, I had learned that not every phone call deserved an answer. But she kept trying. After several days, I finally called her back. Her name was Rachel Bennett. She thanked me for returning her call. I've already told everyone what happened that night, I said. I'm not interested in the accident, she replied. That surprised me. Then what are you interested in? The people who keep telling stories about you. I frowned. What stories? She explained that she'd spent days speaking with neighbors, former co-workers, church members, volunteers, even people from the bus that night. Every single one of them had a different story. A widow whose furnace I had repaired without charging her. A trade school that remembered quiet donations to its scholarship fund. The warming center where I'd volunteered for over a decade. I hadn't even realized it had been that long. Rachel laughed softly. You've spent years helping people without telling anyone. I shook my head. It wasn't anything special. I think that's exactly why people care. Her answer stayed with me long after the conversation ended. A few days later, her article was published. I expected only a handful of readers. Instead, thousands of people shared it. Apparently, people still appreciated stories about ordinary kindness. Meanwhile, Emily began texting me almost every day. She asked how my knee was healing, whether my hand still hurt, how I was feeling. I answered politely, but something inside me had changed. Not because I wanted revenge, because I had stopped chasing people who only noticed me after I was gone. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one trying to keep the relationship alive. A few days later, Emily called while I was repairing a shelf in my garage. Hi, Dad. Hey, are you busy? A little. There was a long pause before she finally asked, would you like to have lunch with me sometime? For years, my answer would have been immediate. Yes. This time, I surprised both of us. Maybe. Silence. She wasn't expecting that. Eventually, we ended the call without making any plans. No argument. No breakthrough. Just two people trying to figure out how to talk again. A few days later, another television story aired. This one wasn't really about me. It was about Gary. One local station interviewed several people connected to the Christmas rescue, and somehow Gary managed to end up in front of the cameras. That wasn't surprising. Gary always seemed to know where the cameras were. During the interview, he described me as a wonderful member of the family. He spoke about how close everyone was, and how much we all cared about one another. Then the reporter turned to Emily. Did your father always volunteer like this? It should have been an easy question. Instead, Emily hesitated. Only for a second. But that second said everything. People watching immediately began asking the same question. If the family was so close, why had David spent Christmas alone? Neither Emily nor Gary had a good answer. I didn't enjoy watching them struggle, but I couldn't pretend I wasn't reminded of that lonely Christmas Eve. Sometimes life teaches painful lessons without anyone raising their voice. About a week after New Year's, Rachel Bennett called again. You're not going to like this. Then why are you calling? She laughed. Because you're being honored. I almost refused before she even finished explaining. The city was organizing a community recognition event to honor volunteers, teachers, first responders, and ordinary citizens who had made a difference during the holidays. My name was on the list. I tried declining more than once. The city politely refused. Apparently, once enough people decide you're a hero, your opinion doesn't matter very much. A formal invitation arrived a few days later. I placed it on the kitchen counter and ignored it. Then Rachel called again. You should go. Why? I just found out Gary's business association is sponsoring one of the event tables. I leaned back in my chair. So Emily will probably be there. Most likely. After we hung up, I stared at the invitation for a long time. Something told me that sooner or later every unfinished conversation demands an ending. This one couldn't be avoided forever. By early February, my knee had mostly healed. It still complained every cold morning, but at least I could walk without limping. The ceremony was held on a Saturday evening at the Dayton Civic Center. I almost stayed home, twice. But eventually I put on an old navy blazer, drove downtown, and walked inside. The lobby was packed with volunteers, firefighters, police officers, teachers, city officials, and their families. Exactly the kind of crowd that made me uncomfortable. A volunteer handed me a program and congratulated me. I thanked her, then immediately searched for the nearest coffee station. While pouring a cup, I looked across the room. There they were. Emily, Linda, Gary, the grandchildren. For several seconds, none of us moved. Emily saw me first. Her eyes immediately filled with emotion. I gave a small wave. She slowly waved back. Gary nodded politely. Linda offered a hesitant smile. Then the crowd shifted between us, and they disappeared from view. Part of me felt relieved. The ceremony began a few minutes later. Awards were presented to teachers, volunteer coaches, foster parents, and first responders. I quietly hoped my name might somehow be skipped. No such luck. Eventually, the host stepped onto the stage holding another card. Our next honoree has spent years serving this community without asking for recognition. My stomach sank. Behind him, a large screen lit up. Photos appeared one after another. Me volunteering at the warming center, helping during community repair projects, standing beside the stranded church bus on Christmas Eve. The audience applauded. I wanted to disappear. The host smiled. For more than a decade, this man has quietly helped countless people. Most of us never even knew his name until recently. Then he looked toward me. Please welcome David Walker. The applause grew louder as I slowly walked toward the stage. Every step reminded me of my healing knee. Every clap reminded me how strange life had become. I accepted the award, shook the host's hand, and answered a few simple questions. Then he asked one I wasn't expecting. Looking back, what was the hardest part of that Christmas night? I paused. I could have given the safe answer. I could have talked about the snow, the accident, my injured knee. Instead, the truth came out. I stood quietly for a moment, looking across the audience. I could have talked about the storm. I could have mentioned the slippery roads or the pain in my knee. Instead, I told the truth. Helping those people wasn't the hardest part of that night. The room became completely silent. The firefighters arrived quickly. The EMTs did their job. Everyone worked together. I paused. The hardest part was realizing my daughter believed someone else deserved my place at Christmas. No names, no accusations, no anger, just one honest sentence. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. I looked toward the audience and immediately found Emily. She was covering her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. For a second, I wished I could take those words back. Not because they weren't true, because once the truth is spoken, it belongs to everyone who hears it. The host handled the moment with quiet respect. He simply nodded. Thank you for your honesty. Nothing more. No attempt to create drama. No uncomfortable questions. The audience slowly began to applaud. Not because of my pain, but because they understood it. When the ceremony finally ended, people surrounded me with handshakes, kind words, and requests for photographs. After a while, I slipped away toward the lobby, hoping to leave unnoticed. Just as I reached the exit, I heard a familiar voice. Dad. I stopped. Emily stood a few steps behind me. She was alone. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she walked forward and wrapped her arms around me. It had been years since she'd hugged me like that. I held her tightly. When she stepped back, her eyes were red. I'm so sorry. No excuses. No blaming Gary. No blaming her mother. Just 4 honest words. I believed her. Thank you, I replied. She looked confused. That's all? I smiled gently. What else is there to say? She wiped away another tear. Can we fix this? I didn't answer immediately. Some wounds heal quickly. Trust doesn't. Finally, I said the same word I had given her weeks earlier. Maybe. Not no. Not yes. Maybe. She nodded because she understood exactly what that meant. Forgiveness had begun, but rebuilding a relationship would take time. We talked for nearly 15 minutes, calmly. Honestly, for the first time in a long while, neither of us was pretending. As we finished talking, I noticed Gary standing across the lobby. For once, he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to explain anything. He simply stayed where he was. Oddly enough, that was probably the wisest thing he'd ever done. Life didn't magically return to normal after that night. There wasn't a perfect ending. Emily didn't suddenly become the perfect daughter. I didn't pretend Christmas had never happened. We moved forward slowly, one careful step at a time. She started calling every week. Sometimes we talked about the grandchildren, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing important at all. One weekend she planned to bring Ethan and Lily to my house for lunch. I spent the entire morning getting everything ready. Then she texted, "Ethan isn't feeling well. Can we reschedule?" The old disappointment came rushing back. But this time I handled it differently. I simply replied, "Of course, let me know another day." No guilt. No pretending I wasn't disappointed. Just a healthy boundary. A few weeks later I met with my attorney and updated my will. Not because I wanted revenge, because life had given me clarity. Part of what I owned would still go to Emily. Another portion would be placed in trust for my grandchildren's education. The rest would support the warming center and a local trade school scholarship. For years I believed my family was the only proof that my life mattered. I finally realized they weren't. They mattered deeply. But they weren't the only people whose lives I could improve. Months later, Emily asked if I could help with money for a car. Years ago, I would have agreed without hesitation. This time I asked questions first. When I learned their savings had been invested in one of Gary's ideas, I quietly shook my head. "I'm sorry, Emily. I can't do that." She was silent. "Is this because of Christmas?" "No. It's because I'm retired, and I have to stop solving problems that aren't mine." She accepted my answer. A week later she called again. Not to ask for money, just to talk. That conversation meant more than any apology ever could. Spring slowly arrived. The snow disappeared. The birds returned. I kept volunteering at the warming center, doing the same quiet work I'd always done. One afternoon, an elderly woman from the church bus walked through the front door. Her name was Eleanor Brooks. She recognized me immediately. "You're the man who told me to stop apologizing for walking slowly." I laughed. "And you still remember?" She smiled. "I remember kindness." Before long, she became one of the center's regular volunteers. Emily eventually met her. The two of them laughed together, and for the first time in months, the future didn't feel quite so heavy. By summer, Emily and I had started meeting for dinner once a month. No pressure, no pretending. Just honest conversations. One evening she quietly admitted, "I was so focused on keeping everyone else happy, I forgot I was hurting you." I nodded. "I think that's exactly what happened." She didn't argue. She simply accepted it. That was enough. Later that year, I received an invitation to a state volunteer recognition ceremony. Each guest could bring one person. Emily never asked directly, but I knew she hoped I'd choose her. Instead, I invited Eleanor. When I told Emily, she was quiet for a moment. Then she surprised me. "I'm glad she's going with you, Dad." In that moment, I realized something important. She wasn't upset because she had lost her place. She understood she had to earn it back. After the ceremony, while driving home, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Proud of you, Dad." I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Not because the message didn't matter, but because I had finally learned something I should have understood years earlier. Love should never require begging. I still loved my daughter. I always would. But I no longer confused being needed with being valued. Sometimes the people closest to us forget our worth, until complete strangers remind them.